Pleasure's equally mine. As I told your editor, the Toronto Daily Star has always written about me in glowing terms, and contrary to popular beliefs, though I do not seek the spotlight, I must seize any and all opportunities to motivate the good people of this rather dull city into action, especially now that we find ourselves at the beginning of what appears to be a second world war. Yes, Emma Goldman is my given name, and I suppose you could say I was born a rebel. I was all but 6 when I saw a Russian peasant flogged for simply existing. Even at that young age, I knew something was radically wrong. An indelible picture of that poor suffering soul has ever haunted my life. It was then that I developed my intolerance for injustice. Growing up, my father told me that all a Jewish girl needs to know is how to make gefilte fish and give her husband babies. I rejected that notion outright and fled his house in 1885 at the age of 16. No, I came to Canada much, much later in 1926. First, I joined my sister in Rochester. Then I headed to New York City. I quickly learned where the anarchist cafes were and heard riveting speeches. Before long, I was making speeches myself. Well, the first time I was arrested, it was for giving a talk on methods of birth control. I grew so accustomed to spending time behind bars that I carried a book with me wherever I went. Yes, my first famous quote. I was speaking to a crowd of the unemployed and starving. I said, "Ask for work. If they do not give you work, ask for bread. If they do not give you work or bread, then take bread." And do you know what the papers began to call me? Red Emma, the queen of anarchism, the most dangerous person in the world. No, sir, I can't say I've ever feared not being liked. A woman is not truly free until she frees herself from the fear of public opinion and public condemnation, and you can quote me on that. No, at my core, I do not believe in violence. The form of revolution I want is bloodless. Ideas are the greatest of bombs. No, they didn't kick me out of America for inciting violence. Ironically, it was for pacifism. In denouncing the draft, I handed them on a silver platter the excuse they'd been waiting for to chuck me all along. It was around this time, at the age of 57, when my friend James Colton offered to marry me so that I could obtain British citizenship. The truth is, I can't say I ever expected to find myself in such a staunch and conservative city as Toronto the Good. However, I found living in London terribly lonely. Dull as I found Toronto when I arrived in 26, I find it equally boring 13 years later. But I've also found a dedicated community of fellow anarchists, artists, and other progressive thinkers who welcomed me with open arms. Ah yes, Toronto's infamous morality squad, who reads my mail before I do. It's simple. The morality squad was created to control women, from measuring the hem of a skirt to issuing a ticket to a woman walking unaccompanied at night. In my opinion, Toronto is a city starved for radical thought, and I've been determined to help make it more progressive, especially when it comes to women's rights. Yes, I recently gave yet another lecture on birth control to a packed crowd at Hygeia Hall on Elm Street, earning roars of applause when I declared that enforced childbearing erodes women's economic and sexual autonomy, and therefore contraception needs must be every woman's right. However, I'm known to discreetly hand out cards directing women to doctors who have assured me they will help. My Attilio. I first met my dear friend Attilio Bortolotti at one of my lectures, soon after arriving in Toronto. He quickly became my closest confidant and unofficial Toronto tour guide. So, of course, his recent arrest has been a blight on my soul. As soon as the War Measures Act came into effect this past fall, the Red Squad raided his home, burned all of his books and papers, and threw him in the Don jail, where he presently sits, quite ill, while they make a case for his deportation back to Mussolini's fascist Italy. Ironically, he's been warning Canadians about the dangers of Hitler and Nazism for years, and now he's been silenced by Toronto's very own Nazi supporters. Well, I, for one, have leapt into action, organizing meetings, raising funds, even hiring a lawyer. Support has been slow to come by. Even this very newspaper was, until recently, too cowardly to cover this gross injustice. Unfortunately, there exists a conspiracy of silence among Toronto's daily papers when it comes to challenging the government during wartime. Not just Bortolotti, Toronto has many foreign-born radicals rotting away in the Don jail while the threat of deportation back to fascist countries hangs over their heads. I do say, I have time for one last question, as I'm due to give a lecture on this very subject, and I must leave enough time for a stiff drink of whiskey to calm my nerves. Oh, the dreaded question of legacy. Well, if I were to write my own obituary for your paper, I suppose I might say something along the lines of, no woman of her generation was more widely known or lived life more fully than Emma Goldman. None clung more staunchly through adversity to her ideals. If I may die true to my ideals, with my eyes upon the rising star in the east, it will have been enough. Dayenu.